Okay, so today I want to talk about creating uh, new outputs. So let's say you've got a character and you finally have them rigged. They could go into a game engine. You could use them for a scene or an animation. My kind of point to prove today in terms of showing how this process can work is don't not that you can't. You could duplicate this character and just build things around it. But what if you have multiple characters rather than just combining all your characters into a single file on the original that you've worked on here? It's better to keep the original, maybe even save a backup, and then work in a new scene where you've created, you link instances and then work with those. So it also saves a lot of hard drive space. So the point today is to try to prove that and show how it can work to create a comic book. So I've gone and drawn out, you should always like pre-plan your work. So animation, comic book, whatever. Have an idea of what you want to do in terms of composition, sequencing. It doesn't have to be a lot. It can just be kind of a rough sketch in this case, but it'll help you get things done quicker and kind of have a plan. So we've got our character. One of the things to point out is like, don't save a version of the character that doesn't have, any kind of multi-resolution mesh or subdivision or whatever on it, because that's going to increase the file size. So right now I've taken all that stuff off, and this guy's about 4K, 4 megs, I should say, or maybe 16, but smaller than the 97 that he was with all of the multi-resolution sculpting on. I still have a version with the multi-resolution, but I wanted to just use the bare minimum for the character here. So let's make a new general file, delete the cube. And when you're creating your scene, the idea is you want to block out roughly as much as you can as you go along so that you avoid doing extra work. So we could model all of the things that are in this composition or shot sequence. We may not need to model or texture all of that in detail. So if you look at this Hellboy comic, a lot of this is sort of shot in silhouette and is kind of rough and flat color, because that's the other thing is the character that we were showing there a minute ago has got PBR textures. We may want to just do a comic shading on him, or a flatter type of cell shading, or to even shoot the comic or do that sequence in silhouette, in which case we don't need to go and create all of the extra stuff that we saw in that original planned shot list. So let's block it out and then figure it out from there. So we'll import in this new Blender file, importing's for importing file formats from others. What we want to do is link. You could also append, but append will actually just put a new copy in this file. What we want to do is create a link to the original data object and then make a proxy to work with from that. So we're going to link. Go to our model that we were wanting to import, and I think I made this small one. Notice these 4.6 megabytes versus the 97 with all of the multi-res sculpt data on it. So I want to use this one, link it. We'll go in, and once you do that, you're sort of into the scene file. The thing you want to link, and you should probably also, before you go and do this, clean up the file, get rid of all the modifiers that you don't need, and make a clean collection and give it a name. So I'm going to import this one, and that will import him into the scene. And you see he's got his materials and everything else. Now the thing is, I can't do anything with this. It's just object mode. He's just a kind of a reference to that. Put it on lines here. I'm also going to turn on my screencast. Yeah, it's on. Good. So I can't do anything in terms of posing him. the way to do that is if you go under with him selected, go Object, Relations. In the older versions, you could make this proxy. I've tried that. It seems to have some bugs when you go and duplicate this thing across multiple scenes. And we may run into that with this library override, but this seems to work better. So we'll make library override and then just select the armature. So basically we've created a group proxy or a group instance in terms of this Mike the Rat collection. And then we have an armature in this setup with our poses and all of the objects linked up that allows us to go and pose this guy. So I can select that. I'm just going to move him over to the left and save. And we'll call this comic scenes. And you should probably import, just in order to not have to do this multiple times, import the characters, all of the characters that you're going to use in your multi-shot sequence here. Don't worry about the objects, but the characters in particular, because they have rigs and we need to do this special proxy work with the rig. We're going to import both of these characters at the very beginning and then use them in all the scenes, whether they may or may not be in the scene or not. It just makes it easier instead of having to copy groups between scenes and stuff. So we'll import our next character, or link, I'm used to calling it import, and technically we are importing them into this. We're importing like a reference to them, not an actual object. So we're going to link to our other character, and we call her Space Girl. So we're going to use Space Girl Final Rigged. Link. And we want the collection. In this case, we want Astro Girl. And we may bring this moon object in later. We may not, since we have a moon right here in one of our shots. So we'll do Astro Girl. Link. I should bring her in. She's a little bit bigger, and we want to scale her down to size, but before we do that, let's go ahead and add her proxy. So we'll do relation. Let's make sure she's selected. Relations. And it's not make proxy, make a library override. And we'll select girl rig, which is her armature in this case. And that opens her armature up to us, so we can grab that and pull her over here. Now, another thing to know is that let's go ahead and save that. Because we've brought these two objects into a new file, our render setup is not the same as what we had in the original. So I've got some refraction on the corneas and irises in his eyes that's not showing up, and her reflection is not working correctly. So if we go to the TV or the back of the camera here for our render properties, and we turn on screen space reflections, and then open that up, and within that turn on refraction, everything should work. There are other ones to consider, like shadows. Like we may want to crank our shadows up, but we'll deal with that when we get there so we can see what happens when we change it. So now that we have these two characters, we need to start blocking out our shots. So let's look at the first one. It's them walking on a sidewalk, street, and a fence. So if we just do this, I think we've talked about this in other videos. This isn't the actual render. We're just toggling the viewport here. To see the output that we would actually render, you have to click on the camera, and this is our the crop, the dimensions, the aspect ratio of our render, and the where the camera is relative to the center of the scene. If we pan and move that around right now, we're just toggling this in the viewport again. If we rotate, we actually rotate out the camera. in order to position the camera, we have to go to View. And under View, and this view is over here in the side, on the tabs on the side. Go to View Lock, and then lock the camera to the viewport. So when we do that, you notice if you look at this outline, it turns red with the dotted lines. And now when we pan, we're actually moving the camera relative to the viewport, or to we're panning the camera around as we're toggling around the scene. The other thing that we need to do, if we look at our reference, is we want this to be a squarish composition. So we need to change this cropping. To do that, you go to this Printer Output Properties tab. And basically, since it's square, we just know these dimensions will be the same. So I'm going to make it 1080 by 1080, which makes it a square. And then from there, you can go and I'm just middle mouse zooming. Let me go ahead and turn the screencast on. They say they're on, but let's turn them on that way. I'm just middle mouse zooming using the wheel. So we just toggle this and get them positioned relative to the camera the way we want them in terms of framing, and we can save. Now we could go and set the camera up within these other shots and change the aspect ratios. But one thing to consider is that some of these shots have duplicate objects in them. So we might as well go ahead and block out the objects in this first scene in case they show up in the next scenes, and then that way we have them. If they don't, then we can delete them after that. But we do need this street or a road, plane, the sidewalk, and the fence in this shot, and this shot, plus some extra stuff after that. But for now, we can just, since we're in this shot, go ahead and block out the extra objects. So let's create, just to keep things clean, these are just empty nodes right here. So we might as well call this collection render or scene setup. And then what we can do is create another collection in our scene collection. Select that, and then click create a new collection. We can call that scene objects. All right, with that selected, now we can go and add a mesh and a plane. R, and scale that up, and we'll scale it. It's going to be a road, so we'll make it fairly long and then shift it over here to where the sidewalk will meet up with it. So we can go and scale this longer and maybe a little bit wider depending on the width of the street and the angle that we're looking at it. Okay, so let's call that road. If we want, rather than toggling this camera, we can unlock the view and then pan around and just build the scene now that we have the camera positioned relative to them. So let's add a sidewalk. Mesh, or add mesh cube. We can hit F to center on it and then scale it flat. And the point here is to do the minimal amount of work to get the shot blocking the way we want it. So I could model this whole thing as a long sidewalk, but there may be some detail that I want in the sidewalk that we're not going to get, or it would be harder to create. So what I might as well do is just make like a piece of the sidewalk. Since a sidewalk is a repetitive object, I could make a length, you know, it has like this gridded kind of fill where you take and they create like a box structure, pour the concrete, and there's going to be these little slats in between. So we might as well just make that while we're here. So this will be the sidewalk with the rough width that we want. It's not the right height, so let's pull it down to their feet. Go to F2 to see that. And then from there you can drop the road. Okay. And then for this sidewalk, since we said we wanted to make it just a kind of repetitive pattern, we can pull this back and add an array modifier to it. So if we go add modifier array, it's going to automatically try to do it on the x-axis, and what we want is to do it on the z, no, not the z, the y. And if we make it 1, it's going to go the size of this object in that direction. So we'll make it a -1 since we want to shift it towards them. And then there's no gap between the two. So we can add 1.01 just to create that gap. And then from there, you can just duplicate as many as you like with the same kind of toggle. Now, one of the things we may want to do is create a bezel. Let's move this up a little bit. We may want to create a bevel to create some edges, because sidewalks aren't like crisp edged. Some of them are, but not very much. You know, they're kind of rounded at the edges. So let's go into Edit and double click on the edge. Okay, so we can't select around since it's a square. We really only want to bevel these. Maybe we do want to do these two. And go ahead and do this back one. We don't care about these because they won't be seen. Yeah, we'll do the back one too. Alright, so go ahead and select bevel. And we'll scale it. So we're going to get a kind of a weird bevel here because we've scaled this cube and we haven't fixed the we haven't frozen the scale. We started it with a square, but now it's really a big rectangle, so this top bezel isn't right. So if we undo that and go out to object mode and then just object apply all transforms, it's going to center it back to the center. We still have our array modifier, but now if we go in and hit edit with those edges selected and then bevel that, notice that it bevels down as much as it bevels across. And that's just something that you have to fix. Hold down shift if we want to adjust it, right? That's just something you have to fix with the once you've gone and applied some sort of transform to an object. When it does these edit mode modifiers, or these edit mode mesh transforms, let's call them, you're going to get the transform relative to the transform of the object. So by going and doing an apply transforms, we should reset everything to 1 so that the bevel goes in all directions in the right way. Okay. So let's say I deselect this and I look and I'm like, that bevel isn't really what I want. A nice little trick is to go up under edit. As long as you haven't done anything else, you can adjust the last operation, and you can set this with an F9 or whatever shortcut key you want, and that will bring up the last operation. So if we go edit, adjust last operation, here's our offset again, and we can go ahead and just readjust the bevel to make it slightly different. So we'll make it a little bit more cartoonish, a little bit bigger. With that, we can come back out and look at our spacing. So we've got a bigger gap than maybe what we want with these bevels now. So if we go to our array and just change the 1.01 to 0.05, just to pull them a little bit closer, I think that looks better. All right, now one other thing we want to add to get this sidewalk looking a little bit better is we can now take and go back to edit mode and insert some edge loops right here to create that kind of lengthwise edge, or I don't know what you call this, the curb part. and then just insert one in the center, grab the edge right here at the top and pull it down like that to create another bevel. Maybe even take these and go a little wide with them. I'm just holding down shift to control that. It's like that. And then if we want, we don't have to do this. We can just select these bottom points. And if I'll show you in X-ray mode, select those and just merge the vertices at center. And the same on this, just to cut down on the poly count. Not that it matters here since we're just blocking this out. And that should be the sidewalk. Oh, we should probably add a material to it while we're thinking about it. Because right now these have a very reflective material on them. The default, which is going to be like 50% rough. But that means it's also 50% shiny, and we might want this concrete to be a little less than that. So you can see what I'm talking about barely right here, where it's reflecting the reflection of the road under it. So let's go ahead and add a new material, call this concrete, and we'll change the roughness to close to 1. Change the color a little bit. We'll just make it a little bit more brownish sandy. Not so red. Not that. Yeah, that'll work. And then let's do a material for the road as well. Call this asphalt. Just make it a darker color. So yeah, there's the reflection I'm talking about. The shininess where you can see this screen space reflection being applied, and that's because of this roughness value. So let's crank that up. Now, you may want that. You might want to paint like a rainy scene or rainy reflection on the road. This is just a rough material right now, but if we put a texture on it that was actual asphalt, we could do that. For now, since we don't know what the final look dev is, there's no reason to put a texture on it. That's why we're just blocking this out, so that we can see the result and then decide, do we want to go flat, shaded, cell, whatever, or do this photorealistic look. Well, I call it photorealistic. It's actually semi-realistic. So we need now for this shot, we've got to add the fence. So we will add another block, mesh, cube, and just scale it pretty flat. Like that. And move it over here. And then let's make these slats. Yeah, I never did scale her, but I'll do that in a minute. Actually, I might as well do it now. I can select her proxy skeleton and then just scale. And she scales from the center, so yeah, it's pretty good. I want her to be a little bit bigger and older. I just want to check scale wise. That looks okay. Let's save. So this, then we can scale it to get the height. It'll sit off the ground a little bit. That seems right. Let's go a little bit thinner on the slat thickness. Okay, so then we can take that, pull it over here, add another array modifier. Make it 0 and negative. No, I keep going to Z. It's on the Y. And get the spacing the way we want it, and then just replicate it. For the fence, let's go to our camera view. That's enough. Okay, so we may want to add, we can also look at this and determine if the slats are too thick. And then maybe change the spacing. Oops, went the wrong way. And I'll go ahead and just take this slat, duplicate it, copy and paste. I'm going to select one of them and then delete the array on that so that it's one again. And then just start rotating and get it at 90 degrees to pull it as a kind of crossbar for the fence. Yeah. Put it in the center, we'll scale it. And then we'll take and we can just add an array modifier to that and just do 1 down. And we'll fix that a sec. This way. So there's our fence. Maybe we want the pointy top, so we can just select this, hit edit, insert an edge loop, and grab those points and pull them up like that. Let's look at our camera view and see. It's pretty good for what we had. Let's say that's good enough. I could add some extra detail here. Maybe I want to add some grass. Since we can see that edge, let's do that. We'll just copy this plane. That's the road. CV, and move it over here. When I copied that, it automatically creates a copy of the material. So we just call this grass, and we're not changing this because it made a copy when we duplicated it. And we can change the color of the grass to oh, I'm changing subsurface. Sorry about that. I missed the base color here. We don't have subsurface, so it doesn't matter, but change this thing blends so much. And the brightness. That way we can see the fence slats with the lighting as well. So I'll pull that grass up to here. Now, I said I wasn't going to add this, but I think I will. I'm going to add a curb so I can have the grass be slightly above the sidewalk line, so that when they get to this next shot, this one, we can add maybe some steps or something, which we don't know that they'll even be in the shot, but it's okay to plan that now, so we can just duplicate it. It's only going to add, we'll only add another square. In fact, we could make it part of the sidewalk period. So if we go back to the sidewalk here and go to edit mode, let's just select by face these two, pull those over a little bit. Then we can flatten this. I'm just going to select scale it flat and go to resize here and just make this a 0. And then from there we can just extrude our what will become our curb. And then take this face, probably this one and this one, and just extrude them up. So it's a little bit above the grass there. And then we can take this edge and maybe put a bezel on that and this one. So we'll just do our bevel, I should say. Just start it. Then from there you can take and just grab the edge you want, this one, and pull it down a little bit. And the same thing here. It's okay. Create some things here, but I think overall it's okay. I don't mind this gap here for now. It's more than it's fine. We want to raise the fence and probably put the fence over in the grass. So select these two, move them up and over a little bit. It's good. Let's save. So you may think I'm being a little picky here, but I'm just planning ahead. So now we've got our grass edge. Here's our fence. Here's our sidewalk, our street. If we wanted, we could put a sidewalk on the other side of the street, but this may not be the final angle. And let's look at our pre-planning here. Yeah, I mean, let me go back to let's go back and lock our view and just see if there's a better camera angle. So yeah, this is like more of what I had, but it's all right. So one of the things we can do now that we're starting to plan out our composition, because I'm wanting to get this in a way where it's sort of more dynamic and the lines work to reinforce what comes next, is if we select our camera, go to viewport display, and then composition guides right here, we can do traditional guidelines. So you can do a center line. We could do a rule of thirds, golden triangle, which in a case of a square is just going to create a crossbar. It's okay. And golden ratio is similar to rule of thirds, but a little bit inside. And then harmonious triangle, which will sometimes play with a golden ratio or the golden triangle. But in the case of a square, again, it's kind of plain and straightforward. So what we can do is, using these guides, we can try to figure out where we might want them. And then also what kind of camera angle we want. So we've got on our camera a 50mm focal length, which is like a 35mm camera. So it's got a bit of a wider angle. We could go like a telephoto, zoom in a little bit, and then pull the camera out so that we get more stuff in the shot, and we can drop and do a lower camera angle that way with getting more of the road in their perspective. Maybe that's what we want. We could put them in the center or to the side. I like the idea of the side. We may want to select our fence and shift it forward a little bit this way, since we've got plenty, because there's only, it ended right there at the edge with that particular camera angle. And this is just one of those things you have to play with. Another way we could fix that is leave it back where it was, so we can do a wider camera angle if we want, and just add more to our array. And that works. I think this is okay for now. We'll leave that different camera angle. She falls on one of the lines in the row of thirds, and her head comes to here. If we added a center line, like a street line marker to the road, it could end up making a nice reinforcement of the kind of zigzag that we have going on here right now. So let's save this, and there's our first composition for now. Now we want to make these remaining compositions, like this one, this one, this one, and this one. So all we have to do, now that we've done all this pre-planning and setting up and blocking, is go up here. What we're looking at right now is, it says scene collection, but it's not actually a scene view. It's actually a view layer. Notice when I select that, it stays the same. This little pull down here is ways to see different things in the scene. This is the actual scene view. This is the Blender overall file view. And what we want is the scenes. So here's our scene, and notice it only has one view layer. View layers are a way of sort of taking things in the scene and assigning them to different views so you can hide them and show them. What we want to do is take this scene, we'll call this frame 1, and then duplicate it. So take frame 1 with it selected. Up here is our scene. It's weird because it's actually in the top bar instead of being here. These are just selection or filter icons. But you want to do this duplicate, and that will make, when you do that, it's going to say new, which would make create an empty scene with nothing in it. Copy settings, which would copy the scene settings. Linked copy, or a full copy. What we want to do is a full copy. A linked copy, we would end up with the same issues that we had when we had to make the proxies for the skeletons. We wouldn't necessarily be able to easily set it up, and since we're working with proxies already, we just want to make copies of those proxies. So we'll do a full copy. Now we have frame 1.001, let's call that frame 2. And if you change back and forth, they look identical because we haven't made a change to frame 2 to show how it can be different. So the first change we want to make to frame 2, if we look at our pre-planning, is make this, it's a shot of them looking down the street. So we can just go to this and probably want to get a wider view angle here. So we can select, go back to, with frame 2 selected, go to the view layer so you can play with the camera. Notice that we have a camera 0.001, so it's created copies of all of our references from the first scene. So we take that camera and we can go back to our 50 millimeter view just for playing around. Whoops, not 500. It's a super zoom. 50, and then move in. So now we start to get, like, we might want her. Oh, we also need to set the aspect ratio. So here's our 50 millimeter setting, and then the call out for this is to be a kind of more horizontal, wider shot. Probably something close to a 16 by 9, or yeah. So we can just go to our printer output properties and just make a wider, and notice that when I do this, the guides change position. That's the advantage of these guides, is once we get them to work, they are relative to the aspect ratio, which helps us position things aesthetically in places that are different than they might be depending on the aspect ratio, which just aesthetically can make for a better composition. Let's see, is this right? I'm just kind of eyeballing it. If you wanted to be precise, you could go 1600 by 900 if we knew that was a 16 by 9, and this would be 900, and that gives you your 16 by 9 aspect ratio. And then from there you can go, or you can just do multiples of pixels. The goal being to get something that's somewhere between around 300 pixels per inch. Okay, so let's get this framed, the shot. So they're a little far. I want to get some of the fence. Let's look at what we got here. And in this case, maybe we want to move him. Maybe it's a little bit lower. And we want her to be, the goal here is compositionally, we don't really need this rule of thirds in sort of ultra wide or wider aspect ratios because it kind of centers things too much. You can still use it sometimes, but it's better to rely on something like this golden triangle where we draw these imaginary, let me just add a block. Like this point where this diagonal and this cross diagonal here come together is a guideline where we might want to place or position one of these characters. And the same thing for the horizontal in terms of being able to put an eye line, let's say here, or reinforcing background lines that fall within this point in the composition, and then use these diagonals for creating dynamic guides and things. So leaving these on, we can place and kind of rotate our camera. Whoops, let me get back to the camera, lock a camera to view, and just get her. So one of the yeah, her eye line should probably be about there. He could be moved over to here. So he's in that line. We could also sort of rotate a little bit to get them closer together and get more of the fence in the back. So like if we take him or do this rotation like this, and then she, actually, yeah, she can be there. And then from that, we can select both the fence and these posts. Let's shift everything back to get everything set up for, or blocked out for this. I'm going to move it because we basically can't see anything in front of them. Yeah, that's better. And we can also move the lights to block these out. So let me save. Let's go back to our first scene and get the shot set up. So here's that. We can move our light to create, like, what do we want? And so this is, in terms of our composition, they're walking down the street, it's trick-or-treating, they're going to a haunted house, then they're arguing about who's knocking on the door at the haunted house. So it's going to be, you know, night for the most part, or evening, dusk. So maybe we're getting this light from street lights. So we can move this behind them. So maybe there's one here to create this long shadow. And then one up ahead. So CV to copy. And maybe that one's further ahead, so it's darker. And play around with the lighting here in a sec, because I want to point out some other things about it in terms of the background. Actually, let's do that now. So we've got these two lights. We get these nice long shadows. We can go to our lighting in our render setup, or our shadows, I should say, and just turn off soft shadows so that we get a kind of harder shadow. And now we can see it's kind of really pixelated bitmapped, so we can crank up the quality to 2048, and that gives us a nice sharp shadow. And we've got them going in both directions, coming from each light. The one that's coming from behind, that light's getting cast from the light that's over here, or the shadow, and it's a little bit lighter because it's being lit more by this light. So we can go to our view layer, those lights, and change their value if we want. Right now they're really high, 50. So that gives us a bit more. I just went to 50 watts. I wanted 500. There we go. That gives us a bit more in terms of the darkness here. And let's go to the other light. Put this one in the scene setup. It basically was put in our scene objects because that's the group that I had selected. Here's the other light. Let's make that 500. Just trying to get the darkness to go down a little bit. So just to point something out, I've got these two lights. If I turn them off, our scene is still lit. It's got this ambient light, which is actually coming from a world background light. This color, this gray color here, which has a strength of 1. If we crank that strength down, everything's dark. If we turn our lights back on, then we get a more lit night kind of lighting. So, but we're not reflecting anything with this scene world turn on. We're not reflecting anything in the environment other than the objects. So when I do this, we're actually reflecting these equirectangular spheres. So what we can do is when we do scene world, we can add an environment into this to create that kind of lighting that we want in terms of a full sky kind of lighting. So what I can do, let me get out of this view. Make sure we're not in lock. So now we've got this dark background. Let's make this 1 again. There's our gray background. To change this to an image, let's save. Just go to shading. When you select something, normally you just see its material, but we're in object mode here in the shader. We can go to world mode, and then this is the same thing that we saw over here where we've got this gray texture and a strength of 1. We can add a texture. So we'll add search environment texture. And this takes an equirectangular image. You can do mirror ball, which is another kind, but equirectangular is the easiest to find. So if we connect that and say open, I happen to have a bunch of these equirectangular images. I'll show you what they look like. Let's just pick like industrial sunset here. And we'll do a blurrier one, 2K. So in this mode right now, the way we're lit, we're in shaded mode, but we don't have scene lights and scene world turned on. So that's why we don't see the sky that I just added. Now with that turned on, we do see it. So I've just added this kind of industrial sunset texture that's an equirectangular, so you can see it from all angles. And if you notice, it gives a nice reflection in the glass and the highlights that are on, because it actually contributes to the lighting. Same thing in this shiny metal reflection. I don't like that one in particular, so I'm going to go and change the image to, I want something that looks like a sunset. So let's do the sky is on fire. So give it a kind of golden hour sunset on the beach look. So now it's a little bit bright. It's like this is, trick-or-treating at 5 o'clock. Let's make it look like it's more like 6 or 7. So that's where you can go to this color and change the value to like 0.5 to half it, or 0.2 to get darker sunset, and maybe even 0.1. Yeah, that looks good. The sun's already down, a little blue in the sky. They get their lighting and the reflection, and we still have our lights turned on, so they give us a nice speck. So the other thing that we can do is we can position where the sunset's coming from. And all we have to do is, if we have in our add-ons Node Wrangler turned on, and I suggest you have that on all the time, then you can select this texture and hit Control-T, and it will automatically insert the needed texture coordinates and mapping nodes, so that we can then take this rotation on the Z and just position and rotate our sky, so like they're walking into the sunset here. And let's look at it through our camera. That helps us with changing the lighting now to kind of match better for the lights that we have. So let's go to our lights, and this light in the front is a street light. Probably wouldn't be a white light, it might be an incandescent, which will have a yellowish tone to it. We might crank that up a little bit. Let's go back up to 1,000 just to see. And take this backlight also to 1,000. Copy the color. Just want to get out of this and see for a sec. Looks okay. In terms of blocking, it's fine for now. In the lighting, we can change, we can add things like this bloom, which will add a, in the render, we'll add a bit more kind of a fuzzy edge to things. You can see it if I go, if you look at the spec here on her helmet. Bloom is basically what's creating this kind of blurry, fuzzy bleed on everything. It's based on like film, chemical reactions for film. You can add ambient occlusion, which will add a little bit more darkness and shadow. These are all things that go towards final look or film, the look dev, which we haven't really gotten into yet. Like we may want to do a comic shader, in which case thinking about these things now does nothing, because all of the stuff that we're doing here would be different if we ended up using a different kind of shading. So for the purposes of getting on with this video, and then we can do the look dev in a separate video, let's go ahead and keep blocking out these shots. Now that we have the lighting though, we've got the shadows where we want them perhaps. Let's make the next shots. So if we do that, notice we've changed the lighting in this shot. Let's go to our scenes and go to frame 2. We don't have the lighting set up the same in this shot. We don't even have our background because we added all of that in a separate scene, and it's not the same here. So what we can do is, if we go back to frame 1 and we want that background, we can just grab these here and then go to frame 2 and paste, and then just connect. Now our brightness is going to be different, so we can set this to 0.2 again, or 0.1. And you can have any kind of equirectangular textures you want in this thing. And we also don't have our second light because we didn't copy it in this scene. So let's go to our view layer, and we have our first light, which if we look at, we can toggle. Yeah, it's right above them, so we can move that further back. Should be back here, so we cast that long shadow. and then one in the front, so we can with this collection selected, select this C and V, and paste that light here, and move that forward so we can get them lit from the front. Let's go to our camera. Now in this view we can take and change our environment so that maybe we get the, let's look and see what we see. So there's these light posts in the background that are kind of nice. So if we line those up, then it's almost like we've got this street going off into the distance, and there's these nice clouds in the background. Although you can see there's an ocean and the road kind of ends here. So maybe that means then that we take that and then just change, whoops, go back to our camera view, into our view, and lock camera to view. So then we can kind of like start to position things where we don't need to see the road. Yeah. So maybe she's like here to the inside, and then he's here. Yeah, that looks good. And we can put objects in the background if we want, but this is a good start. We'll save. So one of the things we can do here, we don't really want to pose them just yet, because we're going to make more of these. We're going to block all of these out, and then we'll pose them in each individual shot. But this is a good starting point for the composition of this shot. So let's go back to our scenes, and we'll close scene 1, take scene 2. We're going to make scene 3 now. Just go up here and click on the duplicate, make a full copy, call that new one frame 3. What's it look like? It's looking at them. It's an extra long, extra wide sort of shot, full page, and they're going to be facing something like this. We can do a false perspective here, but eventually they're going to be up and around the house. Maybe we don't even use this house. This is where you can decide, like, what kind of house do you want to use? Do you want to model it yourself? Can you find something that will work as in this case, a haunted house just as well on something like Sketchfab? So let's do that. Let's save and just look on Sketchfab real quick. Maybe save ourselves some time and use what we actually want to go to. So go there. And we'll look for haunted house. So that would be awesome, actually, except that it costs $25. Let's see, you want to select downloadable. I'm just looking within here. This one, it's kind of got the right stuff, but that's just a facade. Let's, it's actually kind of cool, and that can work. Let's go for that one. So when you use one of these, make sure you give credit to the person who did it. There's also this Victorian house here that could work, but I think this one looks good. I like, and the Victorian's kind of cool too. Let's use this one for this video right now. I like the porch in particular because I want to do some shots. It's got everything I need, and we can texture it, and it's not too overdone. So let's follow this guy just to give him a follower. Like it, and then you want to download the 3D model here. You want to get the GLTF. It's going to download to wherever your download files for the internet go. Close this. We'll open that, and you're going to get this scene GLTF and scene bin. You're going to want them both. I'm going to put them in this comics folder just so I have a place I know where they're at, and just copy them over. Let me close this, and I will import that. So I will I need to import that file. In this case, I actually do want to import it. Let's make sure, yeah, I'm in scene. File, import. You want a GLTF 2.0. Go to where it was saved. This scene GLTF, import. That comes in, let me make sure I'm not in locked view, yep. Alright, so there's the house. I like the size relative to them. And we'll put it in position on the hill. It's got a whole bunch of nulls. But those won't render, so you don't have to worry about it. Just rotate it 90 degrees. Move it into position. It's going to look good. Let's go to our camera. Get it in the right position. Maybe we want to move it further back. And extend the ground. Just trying to get it there. I'm going to get it to composite against those clouds in the background if I can. So move it back there. Oh, notice that it disappeared even though it's big. That's because my camera, or my views, in this case my camera settings, I'll go and select camera, the clipping here is at 100 meters. So if I move that to like 10,000, there's our moon. I could make it bigger. I don't know if I want to, but I'll go a little bigger. And it'll also emit sort of a light towards them. The idea is like this is sort of like a long shot of the moon. And I want to get it so that it looks like it's it's showing in these clouds. So what I need, trying to think of how to get it to composite. Let's go to its object and its material. Okay, so I finally figured out this node setup. It was a bit trickier than I thought. What I did to figure it out was to go and take this world image, my equirectangular image, and crank it up so it was bright. Whoops, wrong way. Something like that. And then take the moon, copy these elements, go into the object for it, and basically take the camera as an input to the vector for the mapping. Shift the position. I had to rotate the X rotation in order to get the proper orientation to match this view. And then do a flip on the X scale because it was rotating in the opposite direction. And then just rotated it into position to get a match to my background. And then from there I have the same image, taking the strength, and I could probably play around with that a little bit. So let me go back to my background and turn that back down. So this should be 0.002, I think. Let's do, I think 3 might work better. Maybe even more. Not that, 0.005. Yeah, that'll work for now. The goal is that I'm trying to get this to look like a moon blocked out by the same clouds. So what I'm doing is I'm feeding the exact same shader into the object here. Had to do some translation so I could get the camera as a texture coordinate input. So it's like taking this camera's projection, feeding it in, and then I had to do some rotation to get the texture, this equirectangular image aligned correctly. And basically it's a 1-to-1 scale. I did shift the position 3 meters up and down. I don't know if I needed to do that after all, but I'll leave it there because it lines up pretty well. And then take that into this strength value. Let's go ahead and crank that down and see what happens. Notice that one of the issues I'm dealing with here is that because this is an equirectangular image, it's giving me all kinds of banding issues. So in order, I kind of used, in order to fix that, I took it through this, converted this environment output to a shader, and then did some RGB curves to limit the color values. So in the color, I cranked it way up, took out, because it's a 32-bit image, took out a lot of the color. And you could probably even play around with that some more, depending on how you want to do this. So there's this And then here's where you have to kind of limit it on the top end. So you have to bring it over till you get to a value that looks good. And this is the face where you can even crank and adjust it even more. So the idea is that these backlit clouds will have, where it's clear in the sky, the moon will show through. And all I'm doing is I'm plugging this into the alpha. So I'm doing a black and white conversion here, which may not be necessary with the limiter now, so I can take that out. I was thinking that might convert the RGB or the 32 bits HDRI image, but it doesn't. But this thing helps in terms of taking it down and then feeding that into this invert. Because if I take it straight from that into the alpha, it's inverted. You can barely see it, but where the sky is clear is showing dark. So I basically just did an invert of the entire image and then used that as the alpha. And that makes it line up across the sky pretty well. So that's just all that to get a backlit moon with clouds in front of it that matches the environment. And it's tricky, like, let me make sure I'm not in lock camera view. Let me save this. If I rotate around, notice that because I have it locked to camera view, it moves with my camera. Okay, so that's a problem. But because I set it up based on my camera view and got it positioned, it matches pretty well. And then I'd have to shift it for different shots. So I'm going to leave it in there that way. If we turned on, just to show what the input with Bloom would be, it doesn't really do anything with Bloom. I could probably add, since this is a sphere, go ahead and add a subdivide just to smooth it out so it doesn't get so rough edged. And if I wanted, I could scale it up. Oh, I shifted the origin thinking I could fix some of the projection, but it didn't. So I can go back and set origin to geometry to get it centered and then scale that bigger if I want. You see how it transitions across the sky the way it should. It's a little bit of a shift because of the this 3 meter, I think. Let's go to 0. No, that shifts it too high. So there is a bit of a shift to get it into position. And obviously this moon is ginormous. But I just wanted to show that effect. All right, so we have this shot set up, but the last thing that I want to set up in it, maybe I want to take these lights down in terms of the value. So let's make them 5. General idea, I could go and scale the effect down. Let me move this light over. By moving it over, notice that the shadows change, so that gives me more edge lighting on the house, and I kind of want it from the moon point on. Let me just turn out these lights and see if the backlighting, it's kind of interesting. Maybe just one of them. So it's like they're at the end of the street. Wrong one. or I'll leave the lighting for now. Let's take this one and move it further. Not that one. This one. And I think Z. Yeah. So that's moving it over. That's moving it further away. It's kind of bright. Maybe, I could do top down. Let's look at where the lights are over them. They're kind of high. Put it there. It's kind of big too. So the idea is like I want to make a street light. 200 perhaps. And the radius doesn't matter because I'm using hard. It does because I'm using soft shadows. I need to change that in my shadows. Turn those off. Also change the size. I have to do that on all of my shots. Let's see if that looks better. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's good enough for now. I'm gonna go 500. I kind of like, I want to show the effect. If you look at like the specular highlight on her helmet, that's because of this the radius of the light. So it's sort of its radius in reflections. So I could just go like something like that to make it look bigger. So it's a reflection on her. I like these shadows. Everything looks pretty good. Yeah, let's say that's good enough for now. Save. We got back to our scenes. So that was frame 3. Here's frame 2. Frame 1. Alright, so like let's duplicate this. Make a full copy. And we basically want to create a setup. That's the next shot of them at the house backlit by the moon, which we already kind of have. We just got to get it up here. Maybe though, what that means then, let's make this, call this frame 4, is that the house itself, if we go to frame 4, the house itself on frame 3 should be rotated, I think, so that we can get a shot where they're backlit. It makes sense. I'll show you what I mean in a sec. So go to view layer, select in the scene objects the house itself. We're not locked in our camera view, and we'll just rotate E. Let's look at it from the camera perspective. Yeah, that's better. So we can pull it back. And maybe even forward. Root, do it from the camera. Yeah, looks better. Make sure it looks good there. What is going on with that? Can't tell if that's like contact shadows. Now I'm in a wide angle shot. Maybe I want to select my camera and yeah, go zoomed in like to the 50 or even more. And then let's see. So I'm obviously going to want to like clip out some of this stuff or delete some of these objects in this shot, like these two. All the setups. Object, pose. We'll make him look at her. Jaw open. Let's go to normal mode, so we're rotating on the jaw. He's posing okay. Somehow hers is off. I'm not sure why. Gonna make him pointing at her. So select all of these minus these. Turn on individual origins and close the fingers. So we'll go down. Oops. Now he's pointing at her. There's something about her skeleton that may be off. I'm not sure. Let's see if it just works okay. That's an okay shot. Let's see. Yeah. Maybe her skeleton right here. Get out of his pose mode. Hers. Rotate her chest. Yeah, everything's off on her. Notice her eyes. I think there's something about her deformation that's off. We'll see if it happens in another one of these shots. His is okay for some reason. Save. Let's go to one of the other scenes that's looking more at her. So scenes, we'll go to, I think, this one. let's try her here. Oops. Pose. And we'll just see if everything's in position in this one. For some reason that one was off. I think it was the distance. There's something about her rig that's weird. But everything else seems to work. Yeah, I think she works okay for some reason when she's around central to the world. His is fine. I don't know. Maybe because of this root. I'm not sure if there's something about this root that's off. But he works fine anywhere. So this is just object setup, I guess. But he's when I moved her up to the house and off of the world center, it was kind of messed her up. Let's do normal. So I'm going to actually rotate these. Let's move this. Get out of the view. Okay, we're not in it. Hit F to look at. Basically, I'm just trying to get him to look at her by moving this up to her eye. So that's locked. We'll just do this. Then he'll be gesturing. And then we'll make him dragging the fence with this hand. Turn on individual origins. I'm going to take these ear pieces and rotate them so they're not so stiff. Let's say that's that shot. I could make his leg shuffle or whatever, but for the purposes of just, getting it there. Okay. So I have to look into what's weird about her skeleton, that it works weird off axis. I'm not sure what, but she seems to work okay when she's close to the world center, so that's fine. We can go to scene. Let's do frame 1. So that one we could leave for now, just for the purposes of getting this thing done. So that's the first frame. Sorry. Second frame. Third. So this one could use a little work on the posing. And it's okay for now. I'm not trying to be too picky. And then this one, obviously this one could use more work, but again, it's going to have the same issue with the, let's rotate her a little bit, like that, and maybe make her hand gesture if we can. Again, I think it's because it's off world, or it's off of, well, actually, that's a little weird. And then he can be, because he's kind of hidden by her in the silhouette, he can be back here. And yeah. Same thing. I'll make him face her. There we go. Then we can make him gesture. And this hand, we can move out of the view. Zoom in. Basically want to get this bone, go back to the view, and position it back a little bit. Okay, so I think that's enough for now. You can see, oh, this is all of the connections on the house, the offsets and stuff. It won't mess with anything for now. Let's see. And then the final shot, which is weird. Did she snap? Yeah, everything worked back to the default. So there's something weird about her pose there, but let me cut back through them just to check. I gotta be in the camera view. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. And then from there you can go render these out. Just doing like a render here. We'll go and deal with the look dev in the next video. The gist of it being we could do this as a cartoon shaded, whatever. Anyway, that's how you go about laying out these frames for comic books in a single scene. And get these different aspect ratios and deal with different cameras, camera view angles and things like that without having to do a whole lot of individual or setting up multiple files or figuring out some way to keyframe the cameras, but you can't really keyframe these output settings. So anyway, if you have any questions, just post them in the comments.